Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Okay, let's get started. Why does everybody introduce themselves and what business, or if you're starting a business. So let me go ahead and unmute. I'm Dennis Weed. I'm one of the coaches with SBDC and at NIC. I'm actually located in the far north part of the Panhandle up in Boundary County, but I have clients all throughout the northern Idaho. So it's good to have everybody here. So let's get started. What I want to do this morning is take you through the developing a 3-year business plan and show you kind of what I have developed and used with clients over the last, 4 or 5 years longer, and what I found works and doesn't work. And then at the end, I'm going to take you through a tutorial. We have 5 spots available for people to use LivePlan, and that's more of a tutorial-based software application where you can go in and put in all your data, and then it produces reports. So I'll take you through the tutorial on that. And if you're interested in using LivePlan after you've seen the tutorial, you'll have to sign up with through SBDC with a coach, and then they can get you started on using LivePlan. So what the product I'm using here is just an Excel-based 3-year plan. If you want to use LivePlan, if you see the tutorial, you can go that direction as well. So let's get started. So when you look at, and this is by year, we'll get into by month on the 3-year plan, how you develop it. Why you want to do a 5-year plan, first of all, you want to estimate your customer base. Where is your customer base? And from that base, what revenues are you going to generate? What are the margins, the overhead, and the profit? So all of those are key, but really the key one is you have to have profit in a business. Number one, to survive. Number two, for growing your business, you have to have profit. So what we have found, and what other SBDCs all across the US, if you have a plan, if you have developed it and you're tracking to it, you have a much higher percent or probability of reaching those goals in that plan. What we find is people in our North Idaho that are using 3-year plans and tracking are becoming very successful in reaching the goals they set. So it is a plan you put together, but it's also a plan you use for tracking and looking at how you're performing to the plan you put in place. So the first part of that is, what is your customer? What is the number one customer? That's the one that has the value proposition. They're the customer that looks at your product as the best benefit that they can get on the market and surpasses any of your competitors. So when you look at a customer number, the number one customer is the one that looks at your product and it has the highest value proposition of any other product on the market, and they're the ones that bring you the highest profitability. I have a friend of mine in a business, and he understands his number one customer, and he keeps back to him. And his profit is driven by his number one customers. When you get down to customer number 3, it's a lower value proposition. They come out, and I was with an individual just a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about customer 1, 2, and 3, and he said, my customer number 3 really doesn't drive any real profits. In fact, he said if they went away, they wouldn't experience any real dip in profits. So the customer 3, they buy, but they don't really give you any value. There's no value in profit from. So you really want to look at when you're first developing your plan, whether you're doing, home construction, bakery, whatever you're doing, look at who is going to be and who is your number one customer. And you want to really ensure that you're communicating with them, keeping them informed, because those will drive the higher profit. And that's what's going to set the tone for your initial plan, is looking at that. And when I say, like, let me give you an example of value proposition. When Uber came on, they had a value proposition. Number one, they were normally on major airports. They were always there. They were cheaper. They got you to your destination quickly. So people saw the value proposition in Uber, and everybody started putting on the app. Most people that travel have an Uber app on their phone. And so when they get to the destination they're going to, they just pull out the Uber app, hit it, and here comes the car to pick you up. And so that value proposition, everybody saw the benefit, and the competition, i.e. the taxis, started losing business because they offered a value proposition. Same thing when you're thinking about it and you're developing this 3-year plan. Think about who is your best customer, and then who is your second best customer, and then who's the third. And so you want to categorize those, because and then track them. So and I'll show you in another data sheet when we do it by month. You want to track how are you performing and selling to your number one customer, 2 and 3. To get to the net sales. Any questions on that? Anything you want to ask on customers, or trying to look at that on customers? The other thing I would highly recommend, especially like if you're starting a restaurant or a bakery, what I do is start another spreadsheet, and I say, okay, list all your products out on another spreadsheet. So if you're going to sell 3 glazed donuts, or you're going to sell 3 of what certain plates, if you're running a restaurant, look at how many you are looking to sell every single day, every single week, because you're going to need to track it. If you don't track it, what ends up happening, you're wasting time and material building or developing a product that doesn't sell, and then you lose profitability. So look at, when you're looking at starting, go and put down every single item and how many you think you're going to sell every day, and then go back and look at it at the end of the week. Did I sell that many this day? Is this one not selling as well? So you're tracking, you're making a projection on what's going to sell, and then you're tracking to it. And that's going to be so helpful in setting your product line and selling it to your customers. And also, you'll start understanding who your best customer is and what they're buying, and you'll start ensuring that that product is available when they're there ready to buy. And so always track, if you're in that restaurant, bakery, any food oriented, I would highly recommend you put a goal together by each item. Okay, let's, any questions on that? And then you want to, let's talk about cost of goods sold. A lot of times accounting programs, you'll see they put labor down in really what's overhead. And if your accounting program does that, take it out of here and move it up to cost of goods sold. Because cost of goods sold it's the direct labor, it's the material, and the freight to build your product. So if you have a bakery, it's all the direct labor in developing that product. It's all the material, it's the flour, the sugar that goes in. If you're building a home, direct labor would be all the labor to build a house, all the nails, board or 2x4s, trusses, everything would be in here. What's down here is when you go buy like tooling that goes over several homes. Maybe an air gun will last you 5 years or 4 years. That would go down in your overhead. But everything else, all that tooling is in here, our nails and plywood. And down here, if a tool is, let me rephrase that. The tool down here is depreciated in your overhead. It's a capital if it lasts more than a year generally. So if you're buying an air gun, usually you capitalize it, and then your depreciation, which is right here, is where that tool is depreciated. And so be careful on what you put in cost of goods sold, because what cost of goods sold does for you, it shows you how much material and labor and freight is going into making that product. It also, when you track it, you can see if you're being more efficient every single month. So as your cost of goods sold goes down as a percent of your retail sales, then you're becoming more efficient in building your product. And the more efficient you become in building your product, the more margin you get, or gross profit. So this gross profit will go up as you become more efficient in building. So that's why you really want to track your cost of goods sold, is how efficient are you being, and are you getting more efficient? Especially if you have a production facility, you want to look at square footage of that production facility to see, is the whole operation more efficient? And it should show up in your cost of goods sold. Is, you get less waste in your material, you get a higher production out of your labor when you're more efficient. Does that all make sense? Questions on that part as you develop your cost of goods sold? So really look at all the products that are that you're building, and how efficient are you becoming. So the margin shows you how the revenue, and it's less the cost of goods sold, gets you to your margin. So again, you're more efficient you are, the more higher the margin. And if the margin is not increasing over time, you should ask the question, why not? What is happening up here in producing my product that is not driving out my higher margin? So if your higher margin is, let's say, is 50%, how can I get my margin to 55 or 60%? If you're running 60% or more in your margin, so if you're keeping your cost of goods sold down to about 40%, and the margin is 60, that's pretty good. That's a fairly efficient operation. If you can get above 60% in your margin, you're running a really efficient operation. And so always look at how my margin is going, and we'll look at that by month. Always track it every month. Is it getting larger as a percent of my net sales, or is it staying the same or going down? So always look at how you're doing on your margins after cost of goods sold. Any questions on that? Okay, let's go. Down here's the overhead expenditure. So here's all the direct, here's your sales, here's the direct cost is in your cost of goods sold. And then your overhead is down here. That's things like your accounting, your advertising, if they have bad debts, has your furniture, fixtures, all those type of things are usually all in your overhead. And overhead will change depending on the business you're in. So if you're a retail outlet, you'll probably have different overhead expenditures than if you're service oriented, like a law firm or a physician's office. They'll have maybe a little bit different overhead expenditures. If you're building homes or doing more construction, you'll probably have a little bit different overhead. So there's some that are similar, and there's others that are a little bit different depending on the industry you're in. So let's look at some of the areas that have issues in losing profitability. The first is bad debts. If your accounts receivable is aging, if you're getting a sizable accounts receivable above 90%, that means it's probably going into bad debt. Anything over 90 days, more than likely, will end up in bad debt. Sometimes you can go up to 120. I was looking at a business about 5-6 years ago, and they had a lot of aging accounts receivable that was really being written off in bad debts. They probably weren't going to get the accounts receivable. So when you look at it, trying to forecast your bad debts, look at first aging accounts receivable. If you don't, and then if you don't get what you think is a good answer from that, I would also look at maybe customers that are normally late in paying or don't pay at all. And hopefully the ones that don't pay at all, you're getting rid of those customers, because those aren't adding any, you're losing a lot of profit off of that. So look at your aging accounts receivable, and anything over 120 days is probably more likely should go into the bad debt, and try to keep the bad debts as low as you can. So if it's the same customers getting into the longer account periods of in the accounts receivable, those are the ones you probably want to drop and keep this as low as you possibly can. The other one down here, and I haven't marked, the non-billable hours. This can be an issue with a lot of the service industry. If you're an electrician, plumbing, even construction, or if you're a law firm, physician, any of those are come into non-billable hours. And if your non-billable hours start sinking down to 55, 60%, you have to really look at it. That's way too low. I've gone to businesses and they say their billable hours is about 50%. It's way too low. For most companies will not be able to make a profit with that low of non-billable hours. So you have to look at the non-billable hours. How can you get them to increase, and why is it that's driving that higher non-billable hours? I had a friend of mine that was running a service industry, and his non-billable got down to 55. So we set up a tracking system with all his employees to get that billable hours, and we took it from 55 up to 80%. We were able to, 80% of all his workers had billable hours. So, and if you can get it to 90%, it's really doing well. So really look at how much non-billable hours you're getting, and if you have to, set up a separate spreadsheet where you're looking at yourself and your employees and say, okay, why do I have all these non-billables, and how can I get them to billable hours, and really drive that. So as you look at overhead expenditures, this is can be a killer on the profitability. And I would track it, if you need to, track it weekly, and definitely monthly if you're in the service-oriented business. I had a friend of mine that worked for an engineering company, and he had the highest billable hours in the company. It was 97%, which is unbelievable. So you really want to track, and if it's one or two particular employees that are having the lower billable hours, look at it and see how you can drive their billable hours up higher. The other, first of all, any questions on that? Or as you look, some of you are just starting, any of you that are in business, and is that an issue? Great question. So my one friend, he was running a plumbing company, and what he was finding is it took the employees too long to get all the products in the van, and then it took too long to get. They were only billing for transportation to a house, but they did it on mileage, and so it was taking too long to go from job to job. And then the jobs that they were doing, he had set rates. So we had to look at how was his rates how was he projecting his rates, and did he need to reset that? And then his transportation to and from, how was he billing for that? And so anything that's not being billed goes in non-billable hours as an overhead. So anything that's not billed to the customer is a non-billable hour. And so if you're running electricians or plumber or HVAC or even lawyers, if you're doing something that's not being billed, then it goes into overhead. And then we'll discuss the overhead, how that applies to what you're charging and your profitability. Look at it and then track it, and ensure that if it's high, how can you get it down lower? Okay, another one that comes up when you're setting your 3-year plan and you're looking at rent and lease payments. So this right here. Last 4 or 5 years has been just horrible on trying to find, if you're finding a building or you're finding, especially if you're doing a restaurant or like bakery or any food services, horrible time to try to find something that you can lease that makes sense. And so that's as we get into an area where I think property or lease rates are coming down, relook at how much you're spending on your lease, and can you change or renegotiate with your landlord? This is over the last 5 years, this has really been an issue for most businesses, trying to find a property that you can lease in appropriate per square foot and make a profit. Because this will, end of the day, could really be a killer on your profits. And so look at your lease and what percent of your overhead is your lease payment, your rent payment, and how you can get that down. And then the other, as you look at it, if you're just starting out, you might not have a lot of repairs and maintenance, but if you have an old vehicle and the vehicle's used in the business and the maintenance is going up, looking at maybe replacing it. So this is like, once this gets out of hand, then it could be time to replace the equipment or something. So again, track that and see if your repairs and maintenance are going higher. And same thing with software. If you're doing software, software can get very expensive. I know most of you probably be using QuickBooks. That's a set fee, but other software, if you want to do ERP software programs are extremely expensive. So be very careful, and does it make sense for your business to have that software package? So again, that if you're spending too much on software, that's something that can, at the end of the day, is going to kind of hurt your profitability. Yes. Did you say on facilities?
Yeah.
Here's the way I look at it, and that's a great question. So if I look at someone's sales, and then I look at, okay, what is it, their current profit? And I'll look at, okay, in the area, either number one, their product is being sold in the wrong area. Okay, so let's say if you're on the water in Coeur d'Alene, a higher priced, right, per square foot, and you're paying, let's say a lease, well, I don't know what storefront there, it's probably $3,000 a month, maybe, depending on where it's located. And if you can't find the customers to drive that kind of lease, you have to move the business, because if you're not selling and you're not reaching your number one customer we talked about up here, that lease payment is probably too much and too high a percent of your sales. So I look at, and it's different for every industry and for every business, but generally I look at it like 10%, 15% probably for rent lease.
Okay.
wouldn't go much higher than that. In
Okay.
this example, I have it, what, 5,000
Yeah.
as percent of sale, you're about 10%.
Okay.
You start getting above that, that's tough to do, to make a good profit. And I know if you're in the restaurant, it's just a tough time. That's why I say really look at maybe as rents around you become cheaper, renegotiating with the landlord or moving somewhere else if you can. The other, supplies, again, that's, keep it within line. You start seeing it getting out of line as a percent of your sales, I would see how you can reduce that. The other part, it's just ran into this a couple weeks ago with a friend of mine. Training. Look at any certifications you have to do annually with any of your employee. If you're in the food service, what type, any OSHA, if you're in construction, if you're in an auto repair business, there's certain trainings you have to do for certain repairs and use of like paint and so forth. And always ensure you put the right amount in, especially if it's required. And so if an employee has to do a day of training, then that would go down here in overhead. So look at all your training for tracking. In fact, I had a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. He took everybody in his shop to, it was an evening class training because everybody had to be certified in a particular use of a product. And so they all went together and they all got their certification. So, that was a unique way of doing it. And then he took his employees out for dinner afterwards. So really look at, when you're looking at training, what's required and what needs to be done, especially for certifications. Okay, let's go on. Any questions on any of these? I touched on some of the key ones that you really want to make sure you're tracking. There might be some different ones that, if you're depending on your industry, you want to track. Yeah, so any questions on that before we go to the next chart? Okay. So here's the I kind of took the previous chart and I circled some things and that we talked about. The bad debts, we talked about the billables, we talked about these in the training. Now I want to talk about the overhead rate. And here's one that I find very few small businesses track. I'll go in and ask someone, well, what's your overhead rate? And, what is your overhead? And they won't know. They absolutely will not know. They'll throw a number, 40%, but they don't know. I would say track your overhead rate two ways. First way is the overhead rate so all your overhead that we went through here, added them all up, and this was $38,000. Divide that by your net sales, gives you your overhead rate. And if your overhead rate is going over 35%, you probably have an issue because that would affect profitability. What I find is businesses that track their overhead rates and work it down, and just like in this case, overhead goes down, profit goes up. Overhead goes down, profit goes up. So look at all of your different overhead rates that we just went through and track it as a percent, and ensuring that over time you start to work it off and get it as low as you possibly can, because that will increase your net income. Your profit for your company will go up as you start working on your overhead rate. And what this also does, when you're looking at this overhead rate, you might look at, for instance, buying a computer software. You might push it out from 1 year to the next, or be able to put it within 2 years. So look at how you can take costs and move them from 1 year to the next, depending on your overhead rate. Large corporations will normally set their overhead rates at the end of one year for the next year, and then they track them and they track costs to that overhead rate. So once you've been in business for a while, set the overhead rate at the beginning of the year and track it to come in lower than that rate. Ways that you can continue to lower that rate, because once you get into tracking it and following it, I guarantee you will start to lower it, because you'll see the effect it has on your net income. The other way to do your overhead rate is what we call the overhead application rate. So take all your overhead costs and divide it by the hours worked, billable hours worked. So if you had, for instance, 15,000 of overhead costs and you had 6,000 hours of direct labor, that's $2.50 per direct labor hour, because you want that. Again, if you're tracking, it doesn't matter if you track it with the application rate or I would do both. Track it both as an application and a percent, because you really want to keep track of it. In light of what profitability you're bringing. So you take, if you had, in this case, it'd be 33,800 overhead expenditures against whatever hours were worked in here in your cost of goods sold, because all your hours, your direct hours would be up here. The first way was taking your overhead expenditures, so the 33,800, and divide that by the 95 per percent. So in this case, that should be 35.6. Unless I changed the number before, I think that's should be what it is. So that's that's what you want to do just by following your overhead. And when you see other larger companies, they'll sometimes have 2 or 3 overheads, especially you have divisions. You have divisional overhead, then you have a corporate overhead. You have different overheads that go into it. But for a small company, it's just overhead divided by your net sales. And really try to keep it under 35%. So if you're coming out, and when you're first starting, it might be, and I'll show you when we go to the next chart here, it might be you're up to 150% when you're first starting, because you're trying to get everything lined up. And after you've been in business for 4 or 5 months, you should start seeing it come down to 40 or start getting it down to 35. But when you're first starting, the first couple, 3 months, I mean, things are, you don't have your sales all set up yet coming in like you expect. Your overhead costs are high because you're trying to get your accountant, maybe some legal documents developed. So it'll be a little bit higher. But once you're in business, and especially after 6 months, that should really start coming down to this 35 to 40. And then you're going to start working it down into the 20s. Does that make sense with everybody? Any other questions on that? On any of that? Okay, let's go to the by month. So you're taking this 3-year plan. And remember, I said we had it here by year. So this is year 1, year 2, year 3. Then what I have like to see people and companies do is put it in by month, at least for the first couple of years. I highly, highly recommend you do it by month for at least first couple, because you really need to look at it and track it, how your customers coming in, your number 1 customers, your number 2 customers, number 3, how are those sales coming in by customer? And what profit by month are you doing? Because most businesses, especially in the retail, January and February are low months. Even in construction, a lot electricians and plumbers, it's usually leaner months in the first couple, 3 months of the year. Maybe it hasn't been for the last couple of years where construction was going pretty fast and hard, even through the winter months. But generally, your earlier months of the new year are slower, and then it starts picking up. So it's always good to do it by month, and then you can say, okay, if I had counted on 45 customers coming in this month to buy my product and only got 25, why did I get 25? And what went into me projecting 45? And all of a sudden you can start to say, okay, is it the month or is it the value proposition that I'm offering my customers? And they don't see the value proposition in my product. So you kind of start questioning, why am I off? And what should I do to change that number that from 25 to 45? How can I get it up? And so in the next month, you in this example, it was projected for 85. So let's say this month it came in 90s. I came in 90 because I changed a couple things over here that made it affect on the next month. So that's why you want to track it by month, so you can make that change quickly. You want to be rapid in making changes so it doesn't continue to go on month by month by month. And the ones I'm finding that track it by month actually perform much better at the end of the year, much better than most people that are not tracking it by month, because they can make, if you're tracking it by month, you can make changes quickly, and that'll affect downstream the other months. But if you don't know what's happening, you won't know that a change needs to be made. So that's why, and the same thing on overhead. You put in your overhead expenditures, like even in this case, the non-billable hours, you projected, or there was projected here at 375, but it came in at 650. You go, oh no, what happened? And then you can start looking at it immediately. And then this month, let's say it was projected at 375, and maybe some changes were made and it came in at 325. So if you're tracking month to month, you can look at it and say, what changes do I need to make the next month? And then that carries through for all the remaining months of the year. So at the end of the year, your non-billable hours will start dropping. And in that case, it goes back to here. If that starts dropping with some other overhead expenditures, your profit will start to increase. And so that's why you want to really do it by month and catch it as soon as you can. And what you don't want to do when you're setting out your 3-year plan, don't just take this number here and say, okay, this is 1,500, and I'll just divide that by 12 and peanut butter it. Oops. I got that. Didn't realize I had a percent on that. You just put that. So that's 125 a month. So don't just take this number here and divide by 12, because every month is going to be different. These might be slower months, and these are going to, maybe in the summer months will be much higher revenues and higher sales volume. So don't just do a 12 months. Look by month how you expect it to come in, and then you can make changes on it. And some of these, like in accounting, you might, your accountant does your books, and he or she will say, well, I'll do it for you for $50 a month, except for when taxes, this could be taxes because it's beginning of the year and you're doing taxes for the past year. Other than that, it's $50 a month. So that you can divide and just put $50 a month, because he's giving you a number. But others, don't just divide it by 12 and throw it in there. Think it through, what the cost or the expenditure is and how you expect that expenditure to come in. Okay, questions on that or thoughts? And you can see here, I did the overhead rate calculation there, and this is a new business, and it expected the overhead is 107%. It actually came in at 351. So you can see the sales being that far off really drove a higher overhead expenditure. And that's not uncommon when you're first starting the first few months. But after that, you should be down. What we talked about over here is in this 30% range after you get going. So don't expect the overhead rate to be in that range right from the start, because all the things that you're getting set up in your business. Okay, questions over before we go, and I want to show you the live plan. Are there some questions, thoughts? Is this helpful for what you're looking at doing?
Is there a template for this spreadsheet that you could share with us if we're interested?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I use this, different people I work with, I use this all the time. In fact, normally I will go through this. I'll go through it with them month by month track. So I'll send it over.
Thank you.
Yep. What we'll do is put it out in a folder at the SBDC, and then we'll send it to anybody. If you want it, go ahead and just send an email or call the office, and then they'll send it to you. Anything else? Any other comments, questions, or something you see on here that, or maybe you didn't see on here and you want to know how to handle? The other, just a real quick comment, and I didn't touch on it previously, on the equipment lease. It's probably, when you're first starting out, it's probably beneficial to you to lease rather than purchase, just because you don't know how that equipment's going to be used. It might be that, the equipment is expensive. I always highly recommend you lease to start, and then purchase once you know how that equipment's going to be used. Because and it depends. I mean, some equipment you can't lease and you have to purchase, but look at it if there's if you're in some production and the equipment is really expensive, that you probably should lease at the start, and then look at, as your profits go up, use some of that profit to buy capital. Like I said, one of the first charts, if your profit is increasing, then it gives you the opportunity to buy capital equipment. So I think for the most part, leasing is always better than purchasing, especially for real expensive capital equipment. And when you look at, just another comment on the capital equipment, if you're buying a capital, let's say I was in a machine shop a few years back, and they had very expensive capital equipment. Yeah, I mean, we're talking $100,000 of machining equipment, and it was sitting idle. Every minute, every hour that equipment's sitting idle, you're losing money. And every day it goes by that it doesn't get used to its capacity, you're losing money. So that's why it's always better to look at leasing, where you can give it back rather than purchasing. Because you purchase, you have to have it running all the time to make a profit. Okay, let me take the next part of this. So that's two different approaches, does the same thing. The bottom line is what I said and what it said in the video, is if you track it, you're going to be 30% more successful than if you don't track it. So I highly recommend, whatever way you go, do a business plan and track it. your numbers, and that'll allow you to see how you're performing, and then you can make changes along the way to get you to higher profitability. Because the bottom line is you want to get your profits growing and keep them growing. Okay, that's all I had. Any questions? We're at the top of the hour, 9 o'clock. Any questions, thoughts? Did it meet your expectations, what you were looking for on gathering information? Hopefully it's something that's useful for you, and okay, great. Thanks, Shannon. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to call the office, or if you want anything more from me, ask them, and then I'll ensure that you get it. Thanks everyone for attending. Appreciate your attendance today.